So, the title now is War and Peace and Environment. Ahimsa paramo dharma. It is dharmic, but is it Vedic? For the benefit of the younger section, let me tell you that there is a subject called comparative religion. If you want to pursue your postgraduate courses abroad, in US, Australia, England, you don't have comparative religion in India. In Pune University, they used to have that faculty retired and they dropped the course. Now gradually others are trying. In Flame where I was working, I was teaching comparative religion, and once I left, again that's dropped there. But in Western universities, it is in a big way. So, if you pursue such courses, they classify religions into groups. In that classification, Hinduism is a wrong word actually, there is nothing like Hinduism, but they created this word during the British time to fill their forms, in the application forms. They started a column called religion. So, when people, Christians can fill Christian, Muslims can fill Muslim, but how to fill for what we call Hindus today? They started this, coined the word Hindu. So, they asked us to fill Hindu. Hindu is not an emic word. In the morning I was talking about emic and etic. Hindu is not an emic word. How to test whether it is emic or etic? Go to any village in India, ask people, are you a Hindu? At least in my area, in Telugu speaking areas, if you go to villages and ask them, are you a Hindu? They say, no, I am a Telugu man. నేను తెలుగోళ్ళం, మేము హిందువులం కాదు. ఈ హిందువులు ఎవరు సార్, వాళ్ళు కాశ్మీర్లో గిట్ల ఉంటారా? They say, who are these Hindus? Do they live somewhere in Kashmir? They say, they don't understand the word Hindu because it is not a local word. In any Indian language, it's not local word. This was coined by the British for filling the forms. But in comparative religion textbooks, there is this chapter, Hinduism. Okay? There they classify Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism together as a group. They give the name dharmic religions to all the three. Okay? Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism together in the professional discipline called comparative religion, which is studied in the Western countries, they are all called together as dharmic religions. Why? Because dharma is the common concept for all the three. For Buddhism, Jainism and Hinduism, dharma is the common concept. There are few more common concepts between Buddhism, Jainism and Hinduism. Dharma, apart from dharma, karma. Karma is another concept which is common for all the three. And the cycle of birth and death, Janana Marana Chakra, this is also common for both, all the three dharmic religions. This is, for example, in this discipline called comparative religion, they, after classifying Buddhism, Jainism and Hinduism together as dharmic religions, they classify Judaism, Islam and Christianity together as Abrahamic religions or Semitic religions. Abrahamic religions or Semitic religions. Which, can you repeat? Which are called Abrahamic or Semitic religions? Which three? There are three which are classified as Abrahamic. Abrahamic. Judaism, 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 Islam and Christianity. Chronologically, historically, Judaism is the oldest, next Christianity, last is Islam. Okay? Islam is the most recent of them. They are all called Semitic, S-E-M-I-T-I-C, Semitic or Abrahamic, A-B-R-A-H-A-M-I-C. Abrahamic religions. Whenever it is against Jews, they use this word anti-Semitic. The word Semitic comes from the region. That area is called Semitic area. Semites. The ethnic group is called Semites. So, belonging to Semites is Semitic. So, the founder of Christianity, whether fictitious or real, we don't know whether this Jesus exists or not. There is an argument that Jesus is a created character, it's a fictitious character created by Saint Paul and others. But if he was there, he is considered to be the founder. So, technically from their own story, he is a Jew. So, it's a reformation within Judaism. According to that story, it's a reformation within Judaism. Whereas Islam was started not in that ethnic group, it is an Arabic group. Arabic people started. But why we connect Islam to that is in Quran itself there is a claim of Paigambars coming from one after the other, and in the list of Paigambars, 23 Paigambars, the Moses and Jesus also figure, and the lineage that is mentioned in the Old Testament and New Testament both, which goes back to Abraham and Solomon and Jacob and all that. The same lineage figures in Quran also. So, because of that connection, the claim, and because of the common myth that is shared, Adam and Eve story, Genesis story that is shared as Genesis for even Quran, even in Islam. So, because of all those connections, they group all these things, all these religions into one, and they call them Semitic religions or Abrahamic religions. Okay. So, because Buddhism, Jainism and Hinduism, whenever I use the word Hinduism, I cannot keep on doing this, quotes. So, you assume, you take it for granted that whenever I utter the word Hinduism, I am doing this, even if I don't do Hinduism. Okay. So, Hinduism, Jainism and Buddhism, which are dharmic religions, have dharma, karma, janana marana chakra, moksha or nirvana, or many of these things as common concepts among them. They share concepts, they have common origins, they have common connections. Tantra goes and becomes Vajrayana and Mahayana in Buddhism, and you have goddesses like Saraswati and Lakshmi being worshipped in Jainism, Yakshas, Yakshinis and these Devata varieties becoming parts of Jainism. Jain temples have Yakshini figures and Yaksha figures. You have so much of commonality that these Buddhism, Jainism and Hinduism share among themselves. I am telling this particularly for the younger generation because the Westerners, Western Indologists are trying to tell you, the younger generation, that Buddhists, Jains and Hindus were always killing each other, taking swords. If a Hindu finds Buddhist, he used to kill him immediately, and Hindu finds Jain and he used to kill him immediately. This is all false propaganda. There was no quarrel among Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism. They had intense friendly interaction with each other. During Shatavahana period, for example, there are inscriptions. In the same inscription, the wife or the sister of the king talks about the Buddha Bhagavan's disciples. And she says, I am donating land to them. And the king is described as the one who performed 100 Vajapeya yagas. Shata Vajapeya yaga krita. Okay, these Vajapeya yagas are yajnas, they are done by the king. He is described as a Vaidika person. Sister or wife of the king is a Buddhist. It is in the inscription. And Nagarjuna used to live in a city called Vijayapuri in the Telugu speaking area. Now the whole city got drowned under the project, hydroelectric project, Nagarjuna Sagar. And they lifted, the archaeologists lifted the whole city up to one place. If you go there now and see that there is a Sriranga temple, Vishnu temple, just beside that there is a Buddhist monastery. And these monks from the Buddhist monastery have to walk across the Sriranga temple, Vishnu temple every day. And the pujari had to walk over the steps of the Buddhist monk to get into Sri Ranga temple. And they used to greet each other. The structure is like that. Structure of the city itself is like that. And today you see Dalai Lama. He meets Kanchi Chandrasekhara Indra Saraswati Periyava Swami, and they had hours and hours of discussion with each other, and they used to have friendly relations. And Jain temples, I come from a town which has 4 Jain temples, one very big Jain library, and 50% of my batchmates in the high school were Jains, and they used to take me to the Jain temple. There is Saraswati, Lakshmi, I used to pray. They used to come and perform rituals in the Hindu temples. So please, the younger generation, remember, if anyone tells you that there were fights among Shaivites and Vaishnavites, this fellow Kamal Hassan, in Dashavataram, he shows that Shaivites and Vaishnavites were fighting so much. One Vaishnavite is tied to an idol. This is all fiction. This is all nonsense. No such immense fight between Shaivites and Vaishnavites used to exist. Then no fights like that between Dvaitas and Advaitas also. I also come from a town where I am a Smartha, I am an Advaiti by family, but all my neighbors used to be Madhvas. And when one Uttaradimatham Swami came, I got Mudrankitas also on both sides of my forehead. So I am a half Madhva also. So Madhva, Advaita, everyone used to live together in a very friendly way. All these fights that they show among our own traditions is all exaggerated stories so that we fight among ourselves. During the British time, they had a benefit, administrative benefit, divide and rule policy. But now what is the benefit? It is just to create economic instability in the country, to destabilize the country so that we spend a lot of money in the security, law and order and all this, and we get destabilized economically. So don't worry, there were no such fights, okay? All of us Buddhists, Hindus and Jains were friends, are friends, will be friends. We are all together. So this dharmic, the word dharmic we are using here. So ahimsa paramo dharma is part of Buddhism, it's part of Jainism, it is part of Hinduism also. But today historians will tell you, historians in the sense Romila Thapar type historians, left historians, they tell you that in Mahabharata, if there is a sentence called ahimsa paramo dharma, it must be interpolation. So that is, somebody has put it into Mahabharata because ahimsa paramo dharma has to be Jain, because it is only Jains who were non-violence based. It was never there in Hinduism. Hindus were always fight mongers, war mongers, violent people. So such violent Hindus, how can they have ahimsa paramo dharma? So they probably borrowed, copied it from Jainism. So that is why I called it, is it Vedic? Did it come from the Vedas also? Do Vedas also have this ahimsa paramo dharma? If it is found in Vedas, obviously it is not a borrowing from Jainism. It is not a borrowing from Buddhism. It was already there in the Vedas also. In the Vedic mantras, if you see, there are mantras which end, at the end of the mantra, at the end of every mantra, there is a word called ma himsihi. Ma in Sanskrit, don't. Himsihi, don't be violent against them, don't kill them, don't trouble them, don't harass them. So there is a list of mantras. There is, in one sukta, there are many mantras. In that particular sukta, all the mantras have this refrain, mahim sihi, mahim sihi. Another sukta, again, if there are 12 mantras within that sukta, 6 to 8 mantras have mahim sihi at the end of them. Like that, this word mahim sihi repeats in several Vedic suktas and mantras, which means don't be violent against them, don't kill them. In that list of mahim sihi, they have the artha also. The same mantra, Yajurveda mantra that I was mentioning in the morning, where they describe earth as beautiful child hanging in the sky, they say mahimsihi, don't trouble the earth. That is environmental, right? And they say mahimsihi, they mention animals, give list of animals and say don't trouble them. They give list of trees and say no, don't trouble them. And they mention fire also. Don't trouble fire also. So how can we trouble fire? The way we are doing in factories. We are troubling fire, that is why there is acid rain. That is why there is ash rain. So they say, no, don't trouble fire also. Mahimsihi is there. So that mahimsihi means no violence. That is, ahimsa paramo dharma is already there in the Vedic mantras itself. Okay? But caution is Jainism and Vedicism, Vedic culture, when you put them side by side, what you see is that the mahimsihi or ahimsa in Jainism goes to an extreme level. Jiva Karunya goes to the extreme level, and they say we should not even kill the bacteria. That is why they close their mouth with a mask, and they don't eat even kanda, onion or potato, which grow under the ground. So anything that grows under the ground also, they think, they believe that bacteria are settled around them. We should not eat them so that we kill that bacteria. So the extreme level of non-violence exists in Jainism. Whereas in what we call Hinduism, in the Vedic culture, in the same Vedic mantras, side by side, there is another word, sugrucha, sugrucha. Sugrucha means kill them, violate them, trouble them. So there are other mantras which say kill them also. So this is not there in Jainism. If you do comparative study between various religions within dharmic list, then the extreme of non-violence is not there in Vedic culture. In Vedic culture, you have do violence also. So this is the basic difference. In Vedic culture, violence and non-violence both are supported. Why violence? In which mantras they are saying sugrucha? They are mentioning wild animals, cruel animals, troublesome animals, and they are saying kill them. If there is a scorpion, if it is troublesome to you, Veda is saying kill it. If there are dangerous snakes, kill them. If there are, because by the time of Vedic period, they believed in supernatural evil entities also. They mention those supernatural evil entities and say sugruch, trouble them. So whether we believe today or not that there are some invisible supernatural evil entities or not, in Vedic culture they are mentioned and they say sugruch, kill them. Yeah, that's also there. Animals were killed as part of yajna until Shankaracharya and others who replaced animal sacrifices with non-violent yajnas. During certain period of yajnas, animals were killed as part of yajna. But animal sacrifice, whether it is done in Vedic culture, ancient Vedic culture, before Shankara, pre-Shankara Vedic culture, or it is done today in folk culture also. In today's folk culture, tribal culture, also animal sacrifice is done. Bakrid in Islam is animal sacrifice only. So if Muslims come and tell you, you are a bad religion, you are animal sacrifice religion, tell them Bakrid. What is Bakrid? And in Christianity also, there is animal sacrifice all over the world. They don't mention. There are all, yeah, it's all animal sacrifice. So folk religion, animal sacrifice in Hinduism is also part of that. Animal sacrifice is all over the world. Let me tell you what animal sacrifice is. There are people who eat pigs. They sacrifice pigs. Okay. do people who don't eat pigs, do they sacrifice pigs? There is buffalo sacrifice. Only beef eating communities do buffalo sacrifice. Goat eaters or hen eaters, they sacrifice only hen and goat. Okay. What it shows is that what is being sacrificed is the food of the people who are sacrificing. And they treat this as prasadam, and prasadam has to be eaten. So you offer only that animal that you eat because that is your food. Okay. So coconut eaters offer coconut. Okay. Coconut eaters are offering coconut because they want to do pickle out of that coconut. Right? You eat coconut pieces. Otherwise, why do you offer coconut? Do you offer any other fruit which you don't eat? Your coconut is your food, that is why you are offering it, right? So all animal sacrifice is food sharing. Those people who eat the meat of those animals, flesh of that animal only, they offer that particular animal as part of that. So whether it was done in the Vedic time or in the folk religion or whatever, it has got to do with the food of the people. Once they sacrifice, they eat it also. They eat the flesh of that animal. That's a different thing. But vegetarian food and non-vegetarian food, what is the philosophy within Hinduism? Was or is or will be Hinduism a purely vegetarian religion? Tell me. No? Hinduism allows non-vegetarian food also. In the hostels, when we used to sit on the same dining table, my neighbors used to be non-vegetarians. There is a day when they put omelets, right, in the breakfast. They used to come and say, omelette, omelette, omelette. Then I used to put my hand like this. But my friend used to say, no, take omelette and give it to me. I'll have an extra omelette. I used to say, okay. What I used to do is, my plate should not get that non-veg. So I used to take his plate only and take omelette and give it back to him. He used to take. I used to encourage him, oh, eat more omelettes. Eat more chicken. I used to tell him where healthy chicken is found, where uncontaminated chicken is found. I used to encourage them. And they used to encourage me for my vegetarian. They used to say, oh, good bananas, take. Never was a quarrel between vegetarian and non-vegetarian on any campus. Right? I never found any such. Recently, when there was a TV debate, there was a Purohit sitting and there was this Dalit activist sitting, and he was saying, you are trying to make us all into vegetarians and all that. This Purohit asked him, so how long have you been eating non-vegetarian? He said, thousands of years. How can you eat for thousands of years when Brahmins are asking you not to eat? Then he said, Brahmins did not stop us from eating. We are not stopping even now. Even now we are not stopping you. Was there a single incident of a Brahmin or a vegetarian sitting in front of a butcher's shop and protesting with placards saying no non-vegetarian food? No. Right? So this vegetarian, non-vegetarian conflict is also not there in Hinduism. In Itihasas, Puranas, Kavyas, there are many incidents where Kshatriyas are described as eating meat. Rama eats meat. Rama offers meat to his father, Dasharatha. He offers. There are descriptions of non-vegetarian eating. Okay? So, this, if there is any imagination that Hinduism is all vegetarian, we have to vegetarianize Hinduism, this is typically Semitic religion behavior. This is typically evangelistic behavior, converting everyone into what you believe, that kind of philosophy. Hinduism never had such vegetarianism, non-vegetarianism problem. Jainism had. Jainism was extremely vegetarian. Buddhism, there is a debate whether it was vegetarian or non-vegetarian. There are hundreds of books written by Western Buddhists, Sri Lankan Buddhists and others describing that Buddhism has to be vegetarian only. Non-vegetarian food in Buddhism is wrong culture, they argue. But Buddhist non-vegetarians are also there, they defend it in their own way. But in Jainism, if anyone is strictly living Jainism, they are not non-vegetarians, they are strictly vegetarians. So Hinduism has this vegetarian, non-vegetarian mix also. In Hinduism, even beef eating was not stopped. Dalits used to be always beef eaters because their profession itself was tanning. They were cobblers, they were scavengers. Scavengers not in the sense of ficus removing, they were scavengers in the sense they used to collect the dead bodies of humans and animals and all that. So they used to collect the dead bodies of cattle also. So as part of that, it became part of their food culture that beef was part of their food culture. And there was never in the history of India an incident where Dalits were stopped from eating beef. No one attacked them, no one killed them, no one lynched them. All these incidents today which are happening are behaviors of those violent gunda, lumpen elements. They want some target for some purpose with some pretext. So they are now finding this as a pretext and they are attacking people. This was never a culture in Hinduism. People never attacked any beef eaters. Dalits were beef eaters all the time. That was their food culture. It was their food culture because of their cattle handling, tanning, leather removing, skin removing, all those activities that they had. So they had to eat beef. So that was never stopped. Okay? Point is, this is all part of diversity in India. India, once actually Obama during his period, once he gave a lecture on pluralism to us. The guy who does not even know the spelling of PLU, pluralism, he was trying to teach us pluralism. Man, we were pluralistic right from the birth of this geography. Right from the birth of the hills and mountains and rivers of this land, we were pluralistic. We always were people who said, live and let live. Live the way you want, I allow you to live that way. So, diversity is part of our culture and we always allowed people to live in their own lifestyles, in their own food cultures. Everyone had his own food culture. We never say, you don't eat this, you don't eat this. We said, a Brahmin should not be eating this. A Kshatriya should be eating this or should not be eating this. That's all. It was, na kalanjam bhakshayet. That was there. But it was not for all. It was specific to specific varnas, it was specific to specific people. So there was nothing like non-vegetarian was prohibited or any such thing. So Vedic culture's specificity in comparison to Jainism is that extreme non-violence was not practiced. Violence was also there. Vedas themselves have Sugrucha, Mahimsihi, both at the end of the mantras. Okay? So those who want to make a note of these words, what are those words? Sugrucha. Sugrucha is kill, violate, trouble them. And Mahimsihi, both are there in the Veda. Mahimsihi is also there, Sugrucha is also there. This is the difference between Jainism and Vedic or Hindu culture. War and peace, are they environmental issues? Yes, today in the morning also I was mentioning that environmentalist movements are taking up war and peace as their issues. In contemporary movements, for example, pollution is considered to be violence. Polluting air is also considered to be a kind of violence. Violence against animals. For example, if you are polluting oceans, if you are polluting seas, you are committing violence against aquatic creatures. That is violence. And if you are polluting air, you are, for example, polluting birds also. You are polluting, you are killing them. So that's also a kind of violence. Very, very important concept is dharma as environmentalistic understanding. This is something very, very important. What is dharma? Dharma, the word dharma comes from dhar plus ma. Dhar is to hold, to carry, to put on, to hold. Okay? In Hindi also, in North Indian languages, dharna, मैं कपड़ा धरता हूँ, वस्त्र धरता हूँ, you know, धरता है, to wear. So, dharma is to hold or to carry, to stabilize. Okay? Dharana dharma ityahu. Dharana means because of holding, because it holds, it is called dharma. What is it holding? Nature is holding itself. So that nature's ability to hold itself is dharma. Okay? The word dharma is used in several senses in Sanskrit. All of us in Indian languages, we know those usages. For example, we say water flows from higher level to lower level. We say this is jala dharma. It is the property of jala. It is property of water, dharma. And peacocks dance when it is cloudy. It is the dharma. Sun rises only in the east. It is sun's dharma. So, whenever there is a feature, a natural feature described, we say it is its dharma, it is its svabhava, it is its nature. So, nature of nature is dharma. Nature of nature means the quality, the property of nature is dharma, right? So, what are environmentalists asking everyone to do? They are saying follow nature, live according to nature, live nature friendly. So, though they are not using this word dharma, they are saying that follow dharma. Follow dharma means follow nature's nature. Follow, be nature friendly. So, the very word dharma is an environmentalist word. There is no other environmentalism needed in India. The very idea, the basic idea of dharma itself is be nature friendly. Am I exaggerating? Am I unnecessarily bringing this? Let me show you. In Bhagavad Gita, they say, Annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anna sambhavaha yajnad bhavanti parjanyo yajnah karma samudbhavaha. After all that, from yajnah karma samudbhavaha, and that comes from Brahma. After all that, they say, evam pravartitam chakram na anuvartayatiha yaha. This evam pravartitam chakram, that very word chakram is cycle, that is eco cycle. In ecology, they talk always in terms of cycles only. Ecology is in cycles, nature is in cycles. So, the word evam pravartitam chakram from Bhagavad Gita, it is showing you have to follow these cycles. Example is this annad bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anna sambhavaha. Annad bhavanti bhutani means from food, creatures are coming. Creatures are originating out of food. Parjanyad anna sambhava. From clouds, from rain, food is coming. And these rains are coming because of yajna. Yajna is coming because of karma. And karma is coming because of Veda. And like that, they have given the whole cycle. And they say, you have to follow the cycles. Eco cycle. Right? And in the same Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Prajapati, when he created the whole creation, he created human beings and he only created devatas also. Who are devatas? If you look at the Vedas, Vayu is a devata, Agni is a devata, Jala is a devata, which shows that nature is devatas. Devatas are nothing but nature faculties, all different nature faculties. So Prajapati, the creator, created human beings and the devatas, the nature faculties. And he says, Puro Uvacha Prajapati. In the ancient time, when he created, he told, you treat the devas and devas will treat you. You treat the nature faculties will treat you back. With this, parasparam bhavayantaha, by treating each other well, shreyah param avapsyatha, you get the best welfare. That's what is said in Bhagavad Gita. Repeatedly in Bhagavad Gita, the basic ideas of environment are mentioned. Evam pravartitam chakram, that chakram is also environmentalistic. And parasparam bhavayantaha, nature and human beings, parasparam, mutually, bhavayantaha, treat each other well, and out of that, shreyah param avapsyatha, it is also there in Bhagavad Gita. So, it shows that right from the beginning, this ecological, environmentalistic understanding was built into Vedic culture, and it is that which is in the foundations of diversity. What is the evidence? We talk of tribal cultures. If an American has to work on any tribal culture for anthropology, for cultural anthropology, he has to travel all the way to South America or Africa. They preserved only a few Red Indians somewhere for exhibition, for some museum. They preserved them and take with a ticket. They take you, show them from a distance as animals like apes, chimpanzees. They show them those Red Indians. That's all. No original tribal people that lived in America are anymore surviving. No European nation left tribals alive. Spanish people, when they went to South America, they committed so much of violence there against the tribals, the local tribals. The evidence is that today they speak Spanish. And in America, when you say Spanish people, they are not Spain people. They are the South Americans who borrowed the Spanish language of the invaders, their invaders. They speak that language. They completely converted them into Christianity. They removed, almost made the original traditional cultures of the local areas completely disappear from those areas. No tribal cultures are surviving in any country. But in India, if you want to study tribal culture, for example, I am a cultural anthropologist by profession. If I have to study any tribal culture, I need not all the way travel to South America or Africa. Who has done? In the northeast, because of Christianity. Yeah, Christianity. It is Christian missionaries that they have done. But I am talking about Hinduism. We have been living here for thousands and thousands of years alongside the tribal cultures. And the tribal cultures were never destroyed by us. Evidence? They are there. What is the evidence? Tribal cultures are there itself is the evidence. They have been living alongside us for thousands of years. We did not invade them. We did not destroy them. We did not make their cultures disappear. They are living as they are. Did we convert them into Hinduism? No. All tribal cultures survive as they are. They borrow some concepts. They say we are children of Bhima. Some people say we are worshippers of Hanuman. We are worshippers of Krishna, like that. but their own forest gods or forest goddesses, their own original tribal culture, tribal gods, tribal rituals, they all continue as they are. So, this shows our pluralism. Obama need not teach us. We are pluralistic by genes, we are pluralistic by DNA. We have allowed tribals to live alongside us. We allowed many folk cultures to survive. Folk goddesses, for example, Gram Devatas, local goddesses, village goddesses, Amma Avar, Amma Varu, all these goddesses, they are folk goddesses, they are allowed. Not only that they are allowed, Brahmins go there and worship. And those people who worship Amma Avar or Amma Varu, they come to the Hindu culture. There is an interaction, right? So, all cultures have been allowed to exist here itself shows that the very nature of Hindu or Indian way of living is diversity oriented. What are environmentalists saying today? Diversity is the only protection for environment. Environmental diversity can be protected through cultural diversity is the environmentalist slogan today. Which country followed this principle for millennia? Only India followed this principle that protection for biodiversity is protection of cultural diversity. Because we knew the secret that the forest people can protect forests, village people can protect villages, local cultures can protect local environment, local nature. So, we allowed diversity and we have been living with diversity. We never converted. Okay, this evangelism was not there. Messianic attitude for you, the younger people, the word messianic. Messianic means belief that there was a Messiah. It's called messianic attitude. For example, Moses is a Messiah of Judaism. Jesus is a Messiah of Christianity. Muhammad is the Messiah of Islam. This Messiah, or they use the word Masiha in Urdu. So that Masiha or Messiah is believed to have got a message from the God, gospel. And part of the gospel reception is that you have to convert. It's your responsibility to convert. We use the word white man's burden, no? British people used to have a thinking that it was their burden to give us civilization. It is part of that evangelistic attitude. It is part of that messianic attitude. You see atheists, rationalists, they weep all the time that others are not atheists. Okay? Did you see rationalists weeping? Atheists weeping? They always weep. Boo, boo, boo. Their weeping is all based on others are not atheists. Only me is atheist, others are not atheists. This weeping, this comes from gospel thinking. Atheists have the atheist gospel. Okay, so they are worried that their atheist gospel is not reaching other people. They are not able to convert others into atheism. They are not able to evangelize, proselytize others into atheism is their weeping all the time. So this is messianic typically. All science students, they think, see the poor people, they are not knowing science at all. I knew science. This is also gospel thinking. This is also messianic thinking. Whenever you have some knowledge, I only have this knowledge, others are not having, I should give my knowledge to all others. This comes from this gospel thinking, messianic thinking. When you are satisfied with you having your knowledge and others having their knowledge, that is not messianic thinking. This is typically Hindu, Vedic way of thinking. Okay, you know Nyaya, Tarka, you are a great Nayayika. Others are not Nayayikas. What is the problem? You are a great Vyakarana, you know Vyakarana. Others do not know Vyakarana. What is the problem? Does a Vyakarana says, the whole world is not knowing Vyakarana. Such a big problem. I have to convert everyone into Ashtadhyayi. That is nonsense. No one does that. Okay. I am a great Mimamsaka. Everyone has to become a Mimamsaka. Others are not having this knowledge. This is not Hindu. Typically not Hindu. So if you know something, I have to educate everyone else. I have got this education, this knowledge. I have to give this away to everyone. That education is evangelical thinking. This is called messianic thinking. From this thinking comes uniformity. This leads to uniformity. No gospel thinking, no messianic thinking, no conversion thinking, no evangelical thinking leads to diversity. Cultural diversity leads to biological diversity, protects biological diversity. So, allegation against Hinduism, allegation against Vedic culture is basically that they never converted. They did not convert. See, they don't say they did not convert. They say they protected Sanskrit with them. They protected Vedas with them. They protected their Shastras with them. They did not give Shastras to others. They should have shaved the heads of all the tribals, put choti on their head and put Yajnopavitam to them, and they should have made all tribals also shout Vedas. That should have been the culture. If they did, they say you have converted it, you are evangelical, you have imposed Sanskrit on them. If you don't do, they say you did not share. You understand? If I convert you into what I know, I am a converting person, I am an evangelical person, I am unnecessarily imposing my knowledge on you. If I don't convert, I was here hiding everything with me. You should have given me Sanskrit, you know. You should have given me Vedas. You should have given me that. You should have given me this. And now I give you, in CBSE, during Smriti Irani's period, they started a proposal that Sanskrit should be part of three-language formula. Sanskrit also should be introduced as part of CBSE. There was all hue and cry, "Arey, Sanskrit is being imposed." Baba, you asked for Sanskrit. You thought it was hidden. Now I give you on platter and you say you are imposing Sanskrit, you are pushing it under my throat. Right? There was a time when Brahmins were not performing rituals in some communities. Marriages, Brahmin priests used not to go. Those days they said, see, Brahmins are treating them separately, they don't go and perform rituals. Nowadays, Brahmins, because they have scarcity of money, they are going and performing rituals in every community. They perform marriages of every community. Now they say you are earning a lot of money. You are performing rituals for every community, so you are getting more money. You should not. If you perform for every community, bad. If you don't perform for every community, bad. If you don't perform for every community, you are treating them as untouchables. If you perform for every community, you are greedy, you are getting money from everyone. Right? If you teach Sanskrit to everyone, you are imposing Sanskrit. You are pushing it under the throat. If you don't teach Sanskrit, you are hiding Sanskrit. Okay? If you teach Vedas on platter, you are imposing Vedas. If you don't teach Vedas, you are hiding Vedas. You understand, ma'am, what I am saying? Okay? So, we did not teach Vedas to others because we thought not knowing Vedas is not a sin. Not knowing Vedas is not any inferiority. Not knowing Mimamsa or Nyaya is not a big inferiority. What is this Mimamsa, Nyaya, Vyakarana? All useless stuff. Right? Who studies these things? For example, truth value tables, symbolic logic. You had in 10th class also, no? Symbolic logic, truth value tables, all these things. A is true, B is true, A and B true or false? A is true, B is true, A or B true or false? A is true, B is false, A implies B, true or false? That table is there, no? boring. Who wants to study them? Did you study Nyaya in some class? You study, these are scholars, you ask them, they will teach you. The partness of a pot, is the partness of a pot, does it imply the waterness of water? That is what they discuss. Who wants to study? Is that not what you study? Ghatatva. Ghatatva avachinna. Jalatva avachinna. Agnitva avachinna. All these things they study. Who wants to study all that? In the forest, in huts, eating only forest fruits, living only in huts, wearing jute clothes. They used to sit and study all the useless stuff like what prefix, what suffix, what derivation, what sutra. Who wants all this stuff? Right? Teach me boating, teach me fishing, teach me carpentry, teach me pottery, teach me war, teach me battle, teach me this. Everyone wants that. Even if people said that they had Nyaya, Vyakarana and all that, people used to pity them. A potter or a carpenter or a soldier goes to the forest and says, "Sir, what are you discussing?" "I am discussing the partness of pot." He just laughs at it and goes away. Useless fellows. Useless things they are studying. And this they say, hiding. What did they hide? Even if I offer it on platter, no one comes to me. I am a linguist also by nature. I am a grammarian. I am interested in derivations. Come on, whoever is interested with grammar, I teach you. All day I can teach you because I enjoy teaching grammar. Come on, come tell me. How many of you are interested? Raise your hands. I will teach the etymology of your name, your place name, everything. Come. Who comes? Right? So when somebody tells you they were hiding knowledge, what knowledge were they hiding? All useless stuff they were hiding. Even if they offered it on platter, you would not have accepted it. No one would have accepted all this knowledge. And now they claim that they were hiding. Okay, in the university, there are philosophy departments. At the University of Hyderabad, where I had my longest stint of 20 years, there is a philosophy department, had 40 seats. 6 applications come. 6 applications for 40 seats. Who wants philosophy? Huh? And they say philosophy was hidden. These Brahmins, they were great philosophers and they were hiding philosophy. Do you want philosophy? Come, I will teach philosophy. How many of you will come? Let me see. You understand what I am saying? So, converting was never part of Indian culture. Fishermen never converted others into fishermen. Potters never converted others into potters. Toddy tapper never converted others into toddy tapper. Vedic people never converted others into Vedic people. This not converting is considered to be hiding. This not converting is part of diversity. It is an environmentalist way of looking at things. Cultural diversity leads to biodiversity was realized by Indians and they allowed everyone to live the way they want to live, including gender aspects. They allowed women to be living as women. They never wanted women to get converted into men. What is happening nowadays in the name of equality, gender equality, is gender conversion, gender evangelism. Masculine gender philosophy is being imposed on women. They are asking them to wear pants and shirts. Women are getting converted into men. And women are not feeling bad about it. By getting converted into men, they are feeling so proud that equality has come. They are not able to assert femininity. They are not able to assert that my femininity is my right. I am a woman, I live as a woman, and don't impose your masculinity onto me. If you want equality, let men wear gogra, choli, let them wear sari. Let all men wear sari. That's equality also. Why only women have to wear pants and shirts? Is it not accepting male superiority that pants and shirts are superior to saris? Okay? Allowing women to be women is gender diversity. Converting women into men is gender uniformity. In the name of equality, uniformity is being imposed. In the name of uniformity, caste uniformity is also being imposed. Castes were allowed to live as castes. Pottery was the right cum duty of the potter. Carpentry was the right cum duty of the carpenter. Just as that Veda recital was the right cum duty of the Brahmins. So this was part of dharma itself is environmentalistic in nature and violence and non-violence in nature. Nature already has violence. Tigers are violent. Lions are violent. Is this violence okay? Tiger violence is okay. Today, we talk of violence and non-violence, vegetarianism, non-vegetarianism, environmentalism. Once one Swamiji was asking in one of his lectures, see, to my Pitha I travel all through hills. All through the way, they have boards saying, protect tigers, protect tigers. And I am protecting Shastras. Are my Shastras more dangerous than tigers? He was asking. Okay, they are saying protect tigers. What do they do in the name of protecting tigers? They leave some deers inside there. They leave some hares inside that area. What are they doing? They are allowing tigers' violence. That is okay? Is that okay? Tigers' violence on that is okay? We are saying in the name of modern environmentalism, modern ecology, food chain. It is all part of food chain. Okay? So that violence is okay, but war is not okay. Other violences are not okay. Okay? So, Hinduism accepts both violence and non-violence because it follows nature. Because violence is already there in nature, human beings also participate in the similar violence. Just as tigers are eating hares and deers, some of the human beings eat animals, some of the human beings commit some kind of violence. So, balance of violence and non-violence is part of food chain. Balance of violence and non-violence is part of nature. Because Hindus want to follow nature, they have a balance of violence and non-violence. Now, war is in the focus of environmentalist movements. There I am using a word, need for reference framed thinking. This is a word I am coining nowadays, reference framed thinking. By what I mean by reference framed thinking is this. If you are a rishi, if you are preaching non-violence, it is consistent. There is no double standards in that. But if you are a violent person and you are preaching non-violence, that is inconsistent. Those people who come to me saying animal sacrifice is wrong, my first question has been from decades, are you a vegetarian or a non-vegetarian? He says, I am a non-vegetarian. My immediate answer is, what is your problem with animal sacrifice? Huh? You ask any person, if he is a non-vegetarian, what is his problem with animal sacrifice? You tell me. It is inconsistent. So this inconsistency, I am saying, needs reference framed thinking. By reference framed thinking is, if you are a rishi, talk rishi language. If you are a grihastha, talk grihastha language. What all these anti-war philosophers are saying is that war should not be there. Nations should not fight each other. No Pakistan, no India. Who is a Pakistani? Who is an Indian? All are human beings. Okay. So this language is the language of a sadhu. Yes, if I approach a sadhu and if a sadhu says, कौन पाकिस्तानी, कौन हिंदुस्तानी, सब इंसान है, then I will agree. He is a sadhu, fakir. तो है, ऐसा ही बोलना चाहिए. अरे तुम तो अरुंधति राय हो, तुम्हारा पॉकेट पिक करता हो तो रोती हो. पॉकेट पिक करने से रोने वाली तुम क्या बोलेगी पाकिस्तान कौन है, हिंदुस्तान कौन है? This is absolutely inconsistent. A person with so much of selfishness in them, so much of self-protection in them, they should not speak this language. My wallpaper is that of Swami Samartha Maharaj, Akkalkot Maharaj, Avadhuta, Dattavatar, Shirdi Sai Baba, any such Avadhuta Swarupa. If I go to them, if a foreigner comes, if a Britisher comes or whatever, we go and say, he is a Britisher, I am fighting with them. They say, आप सब इंसान हो, आप सब मानव हो, be friendly with each other, don't fight with each other. I agree. For Swami Samartha, there is no India, there is no Pakistan. Right? If Shirdi Sai Baba tells me, कौन भारतवासी, कौन अंग्रेजी, accepted. Shirdi Sai Baba has every right to say that. Arundhati Roy has no right. Arundhati Roy is not Shirdi Sai Baba. Arundhati Roy is not Swami Samartha. Arundhati Roy पॉकेट पिक करने से रोने वाली है ना? If I go to Arundhati Roy and pick her pocket, will she allow? Hey, hey! She will shout and she will go and complain with the police. She wants to protect her wallet. She wants to protect her house. Some people pelted stones on her building. She was weeping the whole day. She complained with the police. Did she say, whose house this is? Who is a stone pelter? Who is getting hurt? The way she is saying now, what is Kashmir? What is Hindustan? All nations are imagined. Every nation can be broken. Right? You understand what I am saying? See, I have a right to be selfish. I have a right to be Trivarga oriented. Trivarga oriented means Artha, Kama. I want Artha and Kama. I want power, pleasure, money, wealth, everything. But I should not be talking the language of moksha seeker rishi. That is absolutely inconsistent and hypocritical. So today, all these human rights philosophers, gender philosophers, all these nation is imaginary philosophers, all these are talking the language of avadhutas. They are talking the language of rishis. What nation? Which nation? Who is an Indian? Who is a Pakistani? All this does not suit the mouths of these selfish people. In their personal life, in their personal culture, they are highly selfish. They have a right to be selfish. I am not criticizing their selfishness. Human being has to be like that. It's average human being's way of thinking. But stop there. Don't preach Rishi's philosophy to us. You understand what I am saying? That was what was happening in India. Rishis talked Rishi's language, Raja talked Raja's language. Raja always fought the wars. Rishi never said don't fight wars. Rishi was advising from a higher pedestal. Rishi was talking from the point of view of the supreme concept. So this diversity, this is what I am calling need for reference framed thinking. A grihastha has to talk a grihastha language. A national citizen has to protect his nation. Only avadhutas have to talk beyond nation. This whole Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam language, all this broad-mindedness suits only rishis. Don't speak that language. Okay? There are three views towards environment. They are nature fearing. I have put a question mark there because I have never seen any person who fears nature. Probably this is all fictitiously created by the Westerners. They show Africans to be afraid of nature. If it rains, they get afraid and hide in a cave. It is all in movies made by Hollywood people. If there is a thunder, he gets afraid and goes and hides under a tree. If there is a thunderbolt, he is afraid and he prostrates in front of the skies and says, "Oh God," and all that. I think, in my personal opinion, this is non-realistic. Probably no African, no primitive man was afraid of nature, but they created this picture of nature-fearing people. That primitive man was afraid of nature. Did you not read in your books that primitive man was afraid of nature? He was hiding in caves, he was hiding under trees. Probably this is just an imagination by the Eurocentric, Orientalist Europeans who wanted to malign the Africans and South Americans as living prehistory and primitive man. They created the image of a primitive man being afraid of nature. So let us, that fictitious nature fearing people. Second is nature dominating. Nature dominating is already there in science and technology. We are already talking about it. All environmentalists talk about it. In any environmentalist literature, they say present environmental crisis is because of nature dominating attitude in science and technology, nature dominating attitude coming from various sources. You were asking for references. Any environmentalist book gives you this information about how nature dominating attitude of science and technology has led to this. But there is another interesting article, how environmental crisis is rooted in Christianity. This is by Lynn White Jr., L-Y-N-N Lynn, W-H-I-T-E White Jr., J-R. Name of the article is Roots of the Ecological Crisis. Roots of the... Pankaj Jain probably is borrowing from Lynn White Jr. Yeah. This Lynn White Jr.'s article is so famous and notorious. Notorious among Christians, famous among environmentalists. He traces the entire environmental crisis to the New Testament and the Bible. And because he himself is a Christian American historian, he is an American historian, towards the end of the article he says, when the same statements that all nature is for you to enjoy in the Bible was reinterpreted by later saints like Saint Augustine or Saint Francis of Assisi, then environmentalism got restored into Christianity, he says, in that article, in Lynn White's article. No, he quotes roots of, in the article Roots of the Ecological Crisis, Lynn White Jr. quotes a paragraph from the Bible and says, In Genesis, it has been mentioned that all nature has been created for you to enjoy. That has led to the destruction of animistic cultures of Europe. Because before Christianity entered Europe, they were animistic in their culture. Those days they used to preserve their culture. There is another book, if you are interested, Man's Responsibility for Nature by Passmore, Passmore. Passmore, Man's Responsibility for Nature by Passmore, Passmore. In that book also, this author claims that please don't blame Western cultures for environmental crisis, because we Europeans before Christianity were all animistic. We had presiding deities of trees, we had presiding deities of animals. We were taking permission from the presiding deities of trees and animals before cutting a tree or before killing an animal. So, because pre-Christian Europeans were nature friendly, don't blame us, the Western cultures, for this. So, indirectly he is also agreeing that it is Christianity which has led to environmental crisis. Okay. This same author, Passmore, another author in Man's Responsibility for Nature, is agreeing this. So, this what we see is that today we are talking of broad-mindedness, environmental friendliness and all that, as if we are avadhutas, as if we are sadhus, while we ourselves being very selfish and nature dominating. It comes from science and technology. Third attitude towards nature is nature friendly. This nature friendly attitude was there in Jainism, in Buddhism, in Hinduism. And nature friendly attitude, as I said, is in Bhagavad Gita, parasparam bhavayantaha shreyah param avapsyatha. Vedic distinction compared to other dharmic religions is both himsa and ahimsa are ahimsa only. How himsa is ahimsa? On the face of it, it looks to be a little contradicting. Okay. Correct. That is why himsa is ahimsa. Okay. So, Kshatriya, what Kshatriya does? What is the definition of Kshatriya? Shatam trayate iti Kshatriya. Shata is who injured. So, from injury he trayate, protects. He saves people from injury. That is why he is a Kshatriya. The definition of Kshatriya is the one who saves people from getting injured. Who get injured? Vulnerable people. Who are vulnerable? Poor people are vulnerable to the rich. Physically weak are vulnerable to the physically strong. Soft nature people are vulnerable. They have to be saved from bad people, villains, gundas, lumpen elements. So, Kshatriya does this work. So, himsa to the vulnerable can be controlled by doing himsa on the culprits, on the violators. Okay. So, himsa can be avoided only through himsa. Avoiding himsa to the vulnerable is ahimsa. So, Kshatriya, by protecting the vulnerable through himsa, is doing ahimsa only. Did you follow all the three? Are you vulnerable? Can somebody come and hit you? So, for you not to have himsa, what I should do is, I should kill the fellow who is hitting you. Is it okay? That is ahimsa. You understand? If your brother hits the rowdies in the street who trouble you, Your brother is right. He has to hit them. Right? That is violence. He is doing violence for non-violence against you. He is saving you by doing violence against the rowdies. Right? So that is violence for non-violence. You being saved is non-violence. The rowdy being hit is, it looks to be violence. Okay, so that is violence for non-violence. Himsa for ahimsa. So now both himsa and ahimsa are ahimsa. Ahimsa extreme is there in Jainism, the other dharmic tradition, and it is questionable in Buddhism. Let us compare this with the contemporary perspectives. Do you know a book called One Straw Revolution? Please note, One Straw Revolution. One Straw Revolution by a Japanese author called Fukuoka. Fukuoka, Fukuoka, Fukuoka. I met Fukuoka at his 98 years age. He visited Hyderabad and we had a long conversation. He said he became an environmentalist under the inspiration of Mahatma Gandhi, and a Japanese author. And from the inspiration of this book, One Straw Revolution, all over the world today, there are cultures where no ploughing is done. They don't plough. Under the inspiration of Fukuoka, people say they have to take a small piece of land, construct a house in the middle of that, and leave everything to itself. Whatever grows by nature, they have to eat that food. They should not plow, they should not pick a plant, they should not cut flowers or pluck fruits. Only when it drops by itself, they have to eat it. Do you know the background of this Fukuoka? He was a Nobel Prize winning agricultural scientist. He contributed great things to chemical pesticides. He had 3 PhDs before starting this work in agricultural science. He contributed many pesticides and he had patents for them. And he went on experimenting with pesticides after pesticides. Then he found that not using pesticides is the best way. And finally he reached the extreme of not ploughing also. That culture has been called Parma culture. P-A-R-M-A, Parma culture. There are followers of Parma culture now all over the world. Parma culture. Zero interference with nature. Zero interference with nature. Who is that? Subhash Palekar. Okay. So, this is one culture. All over the world it is growing now. Permaculture, no ploughing, no technology, don't interfere with nature. This is there in Jainism. This is already there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, this Jainism also has the same culture. When I was talking to Fukuoka, I mentioned this to him. Jains also follow. He said, yes, I know, and I am inspired by Jains also. I am studying many Jain books. Okay. And Buddhists also, in their vegetarian version, in their non-violence version of Buddhism, they also follow this. What happens in Mahabharata? What happens in Vedic culture? All rishis live this culture. Rishis never plowed. Rishis never plucked a fruit or a flower. rishis always collected things after they fall down. They don't pluck fruits. Okay? So, what rishis lived, Jains said everyone has to follow. So, they were bringing the uniformity of rishi culture among the general public. Buddha also brought that. Rishis were living a sannyasa, ascetic life. Buddhism and Jainism emphasized asceticism. What it shows is that within Hinduism, whatever was for a certain ashrama, rishi, sannyasi, was brought for everyone in Jainism and Buddhism. They asked everyone to be a sannyasi, everyone to be a rishi. But in Hinduism, in Vedic culture, rishis live rishis culture, Raja lives Raja culture. Kshatriya lives Kshatriya culture. You understand? So, Raja dharma and Rishi dharma are completely separate. I'll give you an example from Mahabharata. There is this Shakuntalopakhyanā or Dushyanta Charitra or Bharatotpatti Kathanam in Mahabharata. In that, Dushyanta meets Shakuntala only because he goes for hunting. What is the reason? Why should he go to the forest where Shakuntala is living? He went for hunting there. Hunting is a violent activity. He completed all his hunting, went to see Kanva. Vyasa describes, he removed his kavacha, armor. He removed his slippers. He asked his followers, his main ministers and chief of the army and everyone to stay at one place. He went all alone to salute to Kanva. What is this Kanva? This man is such a violent man. Kanva is such an extremely non-violent man. Vyasa describes, while Dushyanta was entering into the forest itself, into the ashrama itself, lions were playing with elephants. Cats were playing with rats. Sahaja Vairi animals were playing with each other. That Sahaja Vaira was lost among them all because of the non-violence of Kanva. Kanva was such an extremely non-violent person. His non-violence was spread among the neighborhood also, so much that Sahajavairi animals were playing among. Sahajavairi, you understand? Naturally enemitic animals were also playing among themselves. So this violent man went and saluted to the non-violent person. Okay. Dushyanta had intercourse with Shakuntala. Bharata was born. Bharata was growing into valorous person. He was so valorous that in his childhood itself, he was bringing all wild animals, tying them to the ashrama, trees and all that. What did the rishis do? They should say, see, this is a place of non-violence. You should not be doing all this. They did not do that. They said, wow, so great, Bharata, we all praise you. And they gave him a title called Sarvadamana. You are a Sarvadamana, great. They praised him. These non-violent people, they praised Bharata. His violence, they praised. The violent man, Dushyanta, praised the non-violent people. Oh, so great, you are so non-violent. Sahajavairi animals are playing among yourselves. You understand what I am saying? The philosophy there is, I am a violent man, I live my violence, but I respect your non-violence. I am a non-violent rishi, I live my non-violence, I respect your violence, Bharata. I give you a title called Sarvadamana. You understand? This is Vedic philosophy. This is Hindu approach. This is Vedic approach. Violence and non-violence live together. That is reference framed thinking. The rishis, when they were giving the title to title of Sarvadamana to Bharata, they were jumping into the reference frame of Bharata. They were saying, okay, according to your Kshatriya dharma, you are doing correct. And when Dushyanta was praising Kanva, he was going into the reference frame of Kanva and was saying, as a rishi, you are doing the best. This is your rishi dharma. As per your Rishi Dharma, you are the best of the Rishis. So, Rishi Dharma was respected by the Rajas Raja Dharma, and Rajas Raja Dharma was respected by the Rishis Rishi Dharma. This is reference framed thinking. Kanva or his sages in the ashrama did not impose uniformity and say, Dushyanta, stop hunting. They did not impose their non-violence on Bharata and say, hey Bharata, you are killing all wild animals, don't do it. They did not say that. This is Vedic culture, this is Hinduism. So, what is war in Mahabharata? Now you understand why war? And now you understand the apparent contradiction between ahimsa, paramo dharma. Once actually on the internet, the Sanskrit documents website is there, Mahabharata is all uploaded there. You know this? There is a website called Sanskrit Documents, which preserves many Sanskrit texts. Okay, please go there. There is Mahabharata also uploaded there, but without translation. It is pure Devanagari and ATX text. And it has both versions, critical edition and Southern edition, Kumbakonam edition. Both are preserved there. Once I went there and checked in the critical edition, how many times this ahimsa paramo dharma appears? To my counting, some 23 times it appeared. It may be different, it may be little different, 1 or 2 times more or less. A book which is only for war, having ahimsa paramo dharma 23 times appears to be a contradiction. But now you understand why it can be there. Ahimsa paramo dharma and war can exist together. In the contemporary perspectives, first is permaculture, which is similar to Jainist extreme. The second is industrialist, Trump culture. You know Trump? Who knows Trump? Who does not know Trump? You do not know Trump? American president? Trump. Okay, yeah. American president. Yeah. So, why should a lunatic be? Okay. So, Trump. Do you know that Trump said there is no climate change? He said, there is no climate change. There is no need of any ecological activity. There is no need of any environmentalist activity. All these environmentalists are humbug, he was saying. All these environmentalist movements are humbug. Why he said, you know? We always read books from movements, environmentalist or feminist or any such thing. But you should also know why, if so much of literature, environmentalist literature is coming from United States, so many activists are there, still how much of industrialization is there in United States? Why it is there? Because lobbying is stronger for industrial people than the environmentalists there. The lobbies of environmentalists in Senate, in American Congress, they always lose at the time of policy making. Most of the policy making is in favor of industrialization only there. Okay, it is this industrialist lobby which has also got publications. Their books are there. In their books, they give interesting arguments. One of the arguments I read is volcanoes also send sulfur dioxide. And acid rain is possible even from volcanoes. So, why do you have to blame only industries? So, this other extreme of supporting industries with funny arguments like this one is also there. That is another extreme. So, industrialist, apart from permaculture, there is this other extreme. So, permaculture, no technology. Industrialist, only technology. The midway between is sustainable development. Nowadays we talk always. Now, the model of development, someone was saying, I am working on development. Yeah. from CES. You're working on development. So now the current model of development is sustainable development. And when we talk of industrialization, tertiary economic sector being very important, primary sector to be neglected, primary sector based economies being bad economies and all that, this is considered to be conventional model of development. After sustainable model of development has come into existence, industry oriented model of development is considered to be conventional model of development. Okay. So this sustainable development model, the contemporary model of development, it says there has to be industrialization, but nature friendly industrialization, right? A balance between using nature but in a nature friendly way. Among Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, any religion in the world, which religion is saying this, that please exploit nature, please use nature, take benefits from nature, but in a nature friendly way, which is saying? Tell me which religious tradition is saying this? Hinduism. So among these three modern contemporary models, permaculture, industrialist and sustainable development models, Hinduism comes close to sustainable development model. Jainism comes close to permaculture. Then who is this industrialist? Hiranyakashipu, Hiranyaksha, Ravanasura, all the demonical characters in the Puranas, you see them. You look at the descriptions. Every one of them says, I have controlled Vayu, I have controlled Agni, I brought Agni to my house, I kidnapped Vayu, I make Vayu sit and stand at my beck and call, I make Agni to sit and stand at my beck and call. Is this not what we are saying now in science and technology? I have controlled Vayu. I have controlled Agni. At my beck and call, at my switch call, Vayu comes. At my beck and call, fire comes. So science and technology oriented thinking, which is nature dominating thinking, is there in Rakshasas. All demonical characters in the Itihasas and Puranas are nature dominating characters. Sita is considered to be nature, Ravanasura kidnapped her. Hanuman and Ravanasura, if you see, their qualities are all equal. Both are Navavyakarana Panditas, both have written Natya Shastra, both are Ghana, Jata scholars. You take any quality, Hanuman and Ravanasura have equal qualities. The only difference is Hanuman considered Sita to be mother, nature to be mother. Ravanasura considered nature, he wanted to kidnap nature. Ravanasura got destroyed, Hanuman became Chiranjeevi. So what the story is telling you is, consider nature to be your mother, mother nature, you will be Chiranjeevi. Okay, if you consider nature to be kidnappable, rapeable, now that rapeable, am I using a bad word? I mentioned a book called Man's Responsibility for Nature, right? The author Passmore, inside that book says, man during modern times, instead of considering nature to be his mother, has raped her. He used this sentence in that book. Okay? So Ravanasura wanted to do this to nature, Sita. So you see Hiranyakashipu, what he is saying? What Prahlada is saying? Prahlada said, be nature friendly. Prahlada, the word Prahlada means smiling, pleasing, always laughing. Prahlada, be pleasing, be pleased, be nature friendly. And who killed Hiranyakashipu? A tribal looking man came and killed him. Lion man kind of person, he came and killed him. That's a nature story. Hiranyaksha takes away earth, gets killed. Take any demon, any asura story, devasura stories are all pro-nature and anti-nature forces fighting with each other and demonical characters getting killed. Okay? So, Vedic culture is for sustainable development, industrialists are demons, permaculture is Jainism. Rajadharma and Rishidharma, Vedic view is reflected in Varna and Ashrama. Kshatriya is violence oriented, Brahmana is non-violence oriented, Raja is violence oriented, Rishi is non-violence oriented. There is Rajadharma which is violence oriented and there is Rishi Dharma which is non-violence oriented. We have already discussed all this. There is contemporary social order now. We don't have Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, this caste system is, that is what is not there now. We have the police department. We have the military. The current police department is Kshatriya department. The military department is Kshatriya department. Okay. So, the intellectuals, the university people, the academics, all these soft people, soft field people are all Rishi Dharma people. So, if you apply the Rajadharma Rishi Dharma principle to contemporary social order, you have to talk in terms of Kshatriya Dharma being protected. So, military violence or police violence is like Kshatriya violence. Okay? So, Rishi Dharma, intellectual Dharma, the academic Dharma is another one. So, what are the implications for Vedic view for contemporary statecraft? For example, in economy it is sustainable development. Sustainable development is the implication for economy. And Smith's model, the current economics model, which is a capitalist model, which is a competition model. You see, all Adam Smith's model, perfect competition, imperfect competition, elasticity of demand, whatever you study in economics there, it is all taking capitalism for granted. It's a capitalist economics, basically market economy economics. And the very foundation of that economics is wants are unlimited, resources are limited, right? And the Vedic philosophy has just the opposite of that. Resources are unlimited, wants can be limited if you want. If you want, you can control your wants. So, this controlling wants and all this is part of Vedic worldview of environmentalism and polity, social policy, cultural policy. Social cultural policy is diversity is the social and cultural policy, and diversity comes from the sustainable development model, violence, non-violence, balance model. Polity also, this Vedic Rajadharma and Rishidharma combination model, it has its implications for polity, violence and non-violence. This human rights model, which is already I have talked about it, the reference framed thinking is needed. In polity, all these human rights people are behaving as if they are rishis, as if they are Kanvas, as if they are Valmikis. But their actual behavior is Hiranyakashipu behavior. So, most of these human rights people, in their personality are Hiranyakashipus, in their personality as Ravanasuras, but they are talking Valmiki language, they are talking Kanva language. They are, every time they come with a placard, somebody is given death punishment, some execution is happening, they come with a placard and saying, don't hang him, as if they are Valmiki, as if they are Vyasa. If Valmiki had a placard and said, don't give death punishment, it would have been very nice. It would have matched his personality, but these are not. So, for polity also, the implication is that don't consider human rights for those who do not care for human rights of others. Sugrucha, Sugrucha. Mahimsihi does not apply to them. That is the implication for polity.